Well, I think the reason I wanted to push into it a little bit is already in this season of the podcast, we've had a couple of these kind of conversations about the changing kind of environment of the way to think about culture, especially in a team and staffing, which is for anybody who's from the older generation, isn't that normal to hop around spots? But it seems like there's an emerging trend. And I want to get your thoughts on it that the churches who are really developing young leaders have a Drew Moore from Canyon Ridge in my home church here in Vegas use this phrase a lot. You're trying to find your best contribution instead of a more siloed, become the expert in spiritual development or small groups, and you do that for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. And so I'm seeing this trend in the church. I'm wondering, for our listeners, are you aware that is shifting? Like a lot of churches are not like that. Like you stay in the same role for years and years and years and on end, and eventually maybe retire in that role. And are you aware of the trend, I would say? And then I would ask you, why is this so important to the younger generations that you are able to develop and morph around? So anyway, you seeing it
Yeah.
out there?
Yes, totally. I mean, yeah, for sure in my own story. And again, understanding one, how I'm wired and the things that God's putting on my heart and where He's leading me, and leaders who knew that and walked close enough with me to hear that and trusted me enough to give me those responsibilities. And I think that's a trend. That's a great way to keep these younger leaders, is that there's flexibility in the role. And I think you're right. I think it was like, yep, I'm the small groups pastor until I'm not. But I think now with millennials and with Gen Z, just that flexibility, the nimbleness of, hey, we care about you as a person and we care about what God's doing in your life. And yeah, we want to unlock that. We want to bring forth the best part of you, what God's doing in you, and how that can contribute to, the Lord's work in this church and in this body in this season. And just being realistic about it. I'm a big proponent of seasons and reevaluating. And just because it worked great for a couple years doesn't mean that's where I need to lock in forever. Like, let's continually assess and sense, hey, is this, my best contribution, or is it going to be somewhere else in this season? What does the congregation need? What holes do we see? But it allows people to want to stay because they feel known, they feel recognized, that their contribution matters, and so that they can grow. They can grow. And I think, again, as a disciple, it's like, if I'm the same person I was 3 years ago, that's not great. Like, the Lord should be working in my life and in my heart and shaping me. And again, you can grow in one role for sure. I'm not saying you can't, but don't doubt the fact that God may be, hey, let's think about this. Let's move into this area. So yeah, I think, spot on. Definitely a trend I would see.
We are definitely seeing the shift. And just for our listeners who maybe aren't there yet, we'll talk a little more about practical, like what is a first step you could take. But I want to encourage any listeners out there who's thinking this way. We're not as locked into these siloed roles, and people go on a journey better. And I think about my own story, that's how I was developed. Like I got a chance to lead with Chick-fil-A at a very young age, very young. Like, I'm still to this day, I'm like, why would they let me I had a store at 21. I had like 50 some employees at 21 years old. It's like, but that's where I got my lessons of life. And sometimes I think in church, we expect people to have arrived before we'll place them in, instead of having this developmental mentality. Okay, we're going to switch gears. You mentioned leadership pathway. Some of our listeners very familiar, longtime friends, Dave and Kristen Miller, and we have huge belief in them and refer them often. But some of our listeners aren't familiar with leadership pathways. So Paige, would you give just kind of the background of leadership pathway, what it does, kind of how it was born, and what was the really driving force behind the early stages of its development?
Yeah, and little nod to Dave and Kristen. And I always joke with them. I'm like, once you are a friend of Dave and Kristen Miller, you're a friend for life. Like, they know a lot of people and track with a lot of things that are going on. And I appreciate that in them. So leadership pathway, what we do, this is a great question because my mom asked me it the other day.
Oh,
So I
yes,
was like,
mom question.
okay, yeah, let me give you kind of my elevator pitch, how I kind of boil it down. But I say Leadership Pathway is an organization, and we're committed to helping develop leaders for the local church. The primary way we do that is through 2-year residency programs where you're embedded in a local church, where you're getting meaningful ministry experience and intentional coaching. So that's the bulk of what we do. And for when I'm talking to a candidate, what I say is our goal is at the end of those 2 years, you're hireable and highly desired in your ministry area of choice. And how we get there is meaningful ministry experience and intentional coaching. And we don't just match candidates with churches and say, hey, I hope it goes well. I hope you learn everything you need to. We walk alongside our church partners throughout that process. 1, to identify, to find that leader, and 2, to coach the people who are leading the resident. So you may have your youth pastor who's leading a resident. And so we would be connecting with that youth pastor and just walking alongside and checking in and keeping our eyes on the goal of, hey, if we want this person to be hireable and highly desired at the end of 2 years, what do they need to know? What do they need to experience? How can we help them understand themselves better to grow in that? So that's kind of the elevator pitch, if you will, of the main work that Leadership Pathway does in our residencies. And then you asked kind of where it started, what the need was there, the driving force behind it. And again, Dave and Kristen, co-founders, I would say, kind of they saw the need kind of on both sides of a coin. They saw this church staffing need is always and constant. And
Mhm.
where are our new leaders and how can we find them? So they saw that side of things. And then working with young adults at a Christian college, they saw young adults driven for ministry and they wanted to launch into ministry, but they were hitting roadblocks. And again, I talk to these candidates regularly and they say, every job I look at says I need 2 to 3 years of experience. And where am I going to get that? And that's where residency is such a felt need for those candidates and for the churches. And so the churches get to kind of build this farm team mentality. I think every church staff would love to operate like Major League Baseball, which I know not a lot about, but to have a farm team, to be able to say like, hey, yeah, we've got younger ministry leaders that are learning and growing and practicing. And so we can call them up when the spot is open, when they're ready. So every staff wants that, and every young leader going into ministry is looking for the opportunity. They're looking for to be built into, to be developed. And so that's where Leadership Pathway was born, out of those two kind of felt needs, both from the young leaders' perspective and the church's perspective. It's not easy, it's messy, but I think all the good things are.